إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So in the last session we were talking about the punishments and the blessings of the grave. And the very last topic that we left off on was regarding whether the punishments and the blessings of the grave are upon the body or upon the soul or upon them both. And the conclusion that we came to was that the punishment and the blessings of the grave is upon both, upon the soul and the body, that it occurs upon the soul and the body. Now then, today's topic that we begin with is still connected to the punishments and the blessings of the grave yet, but the topic now is the punishment and the blessing of the grave continuous all the way up until the Day of Judgment? Meaning when a person dies, they go into the barzakh. The trial of the grave occurs and then they are either in punishment of the grave or blessing of the grave. Then does that continue? Are they in that state in the barzakh upon either punishment or blessings all the way up until the day of resurrection is established? Or does it stop at some point? That's the question here now. So think about the scenario again. When a person dies, they enter into the barzakh. The trial of the grave occurs. The fitnatul qabr, which is the questioning of the angels to those people. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? Who is your prophet? Then also there is the punishment of the grave or the blessings of the grave that happens to that person. Does that punishment or blessing continue then forever up until the hour is established? That person who's now buried in his grave is constantly upon punishment up until the Day of Judgment or blessing up until the Day of Judgment? Or does that punishment and blessing of the grave happen to him for a while and then just stop? And then he just waits until the Day of Judgment to be resurrected? Which of the two occurs? That is the first topic today. In terms of the kuffar, in terms of the disbelievers, then there is no doubt that their punishment of the grave, once they die and they are in the punishment of the grave, no doubt for the disbelievers it will be continuous up until the hour is established. عذاب الكافر لا شك أنه دائم. The punishment of the disbeliever, there is no doubt that it is continuous all the way up until the hour is established. And the evidence for that, we already actually covered it, which was, you're nodding your head so you have to know the answer.
Do not make the day come. Do not extend the day.
That was one evidence. There was another evidence about Pharaoh. You remember regarding Pharaoh in the Quran, it said, وَحَاقَ بِآلِ فِرْعَوْنَ سُوءُ الْعَذَابِ النار يعرضون عليها غدوا وعشيا ويوم تقوم الساعة أدخلوا آل فرعون أشد العذاب. It mentioned about Pharaoh that they are being presented upon the fire, they are being punished by it as punishment of the grave, morning and evening. And then it said in the ayah, when the hour is established, then they will be removed into a more severe punishment. Meaning all the way up until the hour is established, they remain in that fire, that punishment of the grave. That ayah indicates to us that Pharaoh is in that punishment of the grave all the way up until the hour is established. So for the disbelievers, there is no doubt about it. They remain in the punishment of the grave up until the hour is established. So that's the disbelievers, no issue. But what about the believers who were sinners and so ended up in punishment of the grave after they died? What about them? Will they remain upon punishment of the grave up until the day of judgment, or does it stop for them? Here the scholars they mentioned, أما العاصي فذكر أهل العلم أن عذاب عصاة الموحدين منه ما يكون دائم ومنه ما يكون منقطع. Scholars they said that the sinners from the Muslims who end up in punishment of the grave because of their sins, some of them, their punishment continues constant up until the day of judgment, but some of them, their punishment may stop. It may come to a stop, that it doesn't necessarily carry on all the way till they are resurrected. It may stop for some at some point. Some of the scholars they mentioned that, and they said some of the reasons as to why it may stop for some of these believers who were sinners is, for example, كَدُعَاءِ أَحَدٍ لَهُ, that maybe if somebody makes dua for that individual, makes dua for him, asking Allah to have mercy upon him, asking Allah to forgive him, asking Allah to overlook his sins and wrongs, etc. That dua that you make to Allah could be a means for that person to have his punishment of the grave stopped. Some scholars mention this. Think about this carefully. We're going to come to a conclusion in a moment. So some scholars, they said maybe that could occur. Some of them said maybe لِحَسَنَةٍ فَعَلَهَا فِي حَيَاتِهِ كَصَدَقَةٍ جَارِيَةٍ. Maybe that sinner from the Muslims who is being punished in the grave may at some point have his punishment stopped due to some good deed he himself had done during his life, like sadaqah jariyah, the ongoing charity. Like when you give charity to a masjid and you die, the masjid is still going to be used after your death. Muslims are still going to be coming and praying in that mosque after you die. So you continue to get the reward for it because you helped build that mosque when you were alive. You helped to refurbish that mosque when you were alive. So even after you die, other Muslims are still using that same mosque. So you continue to get the reward for it. Some scholars said maybe that could be one of the types of deeds that could be the cause of your punishment being stopped after a while. أو بحسنة تهدى إليه كتصدق أحد عنه. And some of them said, maybe if someone does a good deed on your behalf, because there are some deeds you can do on behalf of other Muslims. Like, for example, what? What kind of good deeds can you do but give the reward to somebody else? So you do that good deed on their behalf. What kind of deeds? Hajj, for example. You can do Hajj on behalf of someone else. And you also get the reward of doing Hajj. There is reward for you in that. But the Hajj is being intended for that other person. And also, lesser than Hajj, Umrah. Umrah can be done on behalf of somebody else. Otherwise, build a well. Okay, so building a well is generally giving charity on behalf of somebody. You can do that. You can give charity on behalf of someone. You could give charity with the intention of it being for somebody deceased, for your father, etc. You can give charity on their behalf. You can also fast. And there are certain rulings to remember regarding that. But certain types of fasting can be done on behalf of the deceased. And there are rulings about that, though. We'll mention those another time. So there are certain types of deeds you can do for other people. There are other deeds that many people do which are not supposed to be done for other people, and they don't count, as many of the scholars have highlighted. A common one is when people recite the Quran on behalf of somebody else. They go to the grave of the person and they recite Quran and they say the reward is for the person in the grave. Many scholars have said that is not established. And there are certain other types of things people do which are not established. But Hajj, Umrah, charity, these kinds of things are established. Dua, making dua for that person. So some scholars said maybe somebody does something like that for you on your behalf, and as a consequence, your punishment of the grave is stopped. وَقَدْ يَسْتَمِرْ الْعَذَابُ عَلَيْهِ وَيَدُومُ. So, with this issue of whether the punishment of the grave is continuous from after you die up until the day of judgment, in terms of the disbelievers, absolutely yes it is. As for the Muslims who were sinners and they were in the punishment of the grave, some scholars said maybe it might stop after a while, and they gave these kinds of reasons. Others, they said, the reality is when you look at the Quran and the Sunnah, there is no clear evidence highlighting that the punishment of the grave comes to a stop. They said there is no evidence highlighting it in reality. That even for the Muslim who was a sinner and is in the punishment of the grave, that it stops. There's no clear evidence highlighting that. Whereas the evidences that talk about the punishment continuing, there are many of those. There are many evidences highlighting that the punishment continues. But there are very few or hardly any at all in reality that are clearly indicating that it stops. So then, if that's the case, if there are no real evidences highlighting that the punishment of the grave stops at some point for the sinners of the Muslims, then how did some scholars come to the conclusion that maybe it does stop? If there are no clear evidences, they made a judgment, an analogy based upon the punishment in the hellfire. The sinners of the Muslims who end up in the hellfire, do they end up in there forever? the sinners, not the mushrikun, Muslims who died upon Tawheed, but they had committed sins and sins and sins, so they end up as a consequence of some of those sins in the hellfire initially. Do they remain there forever? No, they eventually come out of that when they are cleansed and purified of their sins and enter paradise. So the scholar said maybe that's the same as what happens in the barzakh too. That the sinners of the Muslims are punished for a while in the punishment of the grave, but then eventually it stops. Just like in the afterlife, they'll be punished in the hellfire for a while, but then it stops and they go to paradise. So they made that kind of judgment that maybe the analogy could be the same regarding the afterlife and their punishment in the hellfire being temporary, that their punishment in the grave is maybe temporary too. But that is simply an analogy that they've made. There is no clear evidence highlighting that the punishment of the grave does come to an end for the sinners of the Muslims. But as we said, the other side of the spectrum, evidences indicating it continues. There are many of those. Examples, the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar. Hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, بينما رجل يجر إزاره من الخيلاء خسف به فهو يتجلجل في الأرض إلى يوم القيامة وعند مسلم فهو يتجلجل في الأرض حتى تقوم الساعة. In this hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, mentions about a man who was dragging his garments below his ankles. We know that it is haram for men to wear their clothes long down past the ankles. The bottom clothes have to be above the ankles, all times, not just in the prayer, at all times. So in this narration it mentions that there was a man who was wearing his garments below his ankles, long, dragging them below the ankles, out of pride that this individual will be in that punishment in the ground up until the day of resurrection. In the other narration, up until the hour is established. So those are clear in Muslim, in Sahih Muslim, in Bukhari, that the wording of the hadith says he will be in the punishment up until the day of resurrection, and in the other wording, up until the hour is established. So that indicates the punishment is continuous up until the hour is established. This narration, though, does say about a man wearing his garments below his ankles out of pride. So then many people, they come along and they say, what if you wear your garments below your ankles without any pride? Is that okay then? Because the narration here does say he was wearing them below his ankles out of pride. So if you wear them below your ankles but not associated to any pride, then is that okay? The answer is no. Because there are other hadith that highlight a different punishment for those who wear their garments from the men below their ankles, even without pride. So there is a punishment for wearing them below the ankles with pride, and a different punishment for wearing them below the ankles without pride. So in both cases, with or without pride, it is haram and there's a punishment. That is the ruling with regards to men and their garments, that they should not be below the ankles, they should not fall below the ankles. At all times, not just in the prayer, at all times. The second evidence highlighting that the punishment of the grave is continuous is the famous hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه مر بقبرين, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam walked by two graves. He walked by two graves. فقال إنهما ليعذبان, and the Messenger said, these two, they are being punished. They are in the punishment of the grave. وما يعذبان في كبير, and they are not being punished for something big. Meaning the sin that they had done, those two people had thought that this sin of theirs was something minor. They had thought their sin that they were doing was minor. So the Messenger said they are not being punished for something big as they assumed. But obviously it was big because they are in the punishment of the grave for it now. So what are the sins? أَمَّا أَحَدُهُمَا, the Messenger said, as for one of them, فَكَانَ لَا يَسْتَتِرُ مِنَ الْبَوْلِ. In another version, كَانَ لَا يَسْتَنزِهُ مِنَ الْبَوْلِ. That one of them, he never used to look after himself when urinating. He never used to, in one narration, yastatir, conceal himself when urinating. That he would do it publicly, visibly, where people could see him, and he could be seen by the people urinating. He never used to conceal himself. We know that when a person urinates, when you have to use the toilet, you need to conceal yourself from the eyes of the people, not publicly where they can all see you. So it mentions one of them never used to conceal himself when urinating. And that indicates to you that these public toilets that they have in these various places now, from all the time the way they have been, these public toilets, you have the cubicles, that's concealed, but then always you have the things in the wall that are supposed to be toilets. These things stuck on the wall, and you go stand up and urinate publicly in the eyes of the people. Impermissible. Impermissible. Not only from the aspect of being visible to everybody, anybody can come and see you walking in and out. And not only that, the person comes and stands right next to you on this side, right next to you on that side. That is impermissible. The narration mentions this individual never used to conceal himself when urinating. But the other version of the narration says, كَانَ لَا يَسْتَنزِهُ مِنَ الْبَوْلِ, that he never used to look after himself when urinating, meaning the splashes used to go everywhere, on his garments, on his body. Never used to look after himself, splashes going everywhere. And these things in the wall, a person stands and urinates there, then what do you expect? Splashes, they go. As you urinate, the splashes will come upon yourself, upon your garments, and there is nothing there. It is not the proper way to urinate. And that's why in the Sunnah, generally in the Sunnah is that you are supposed to sit down when you urinate. I'm not talking about when you have to use the toilet in terms of defecation. Urine. When you urinate, it is Sunnah to sit down, because that is better for looking after yourself from the splashes and on your clothes and on your body. Sit down rather than standing. Standing up and urinating, the splashes are going to go everywhere. That's why it's Sunnah to sit and urinate, not stand up. And so these narrations, they highlight this one individual. The Messenger said, he is being punished in the grave because of that sin. He never used to look after himself when urinating, or he never used to conceal himself from the eyes of the people when urinating. For that sin, being punished in the grave. And this is why the Messenger said, as some scholars explained, they thought it was minor. He thought, that's minor, what's the big deal? What sin am I committing? Just urinating and not really bothering and caring and not concealing himself. He didn't think it was a big thing. But that sin was the cause of the punishment of the grave for him. The second one, the Messenger said, because it was two graves, the second one the Messenger said, وَأَمَّا الْآخَرُ فَكَانَ يَمْشِي بِالنَّمِيمَةِ. The second one, he's being punished in the grave because he used to go around carrying tales, carrying stories between people to cause corruption. Going from this person to that person and saying, you know, I was with him yesterday and he was saying this and he mentioned this and he said that, and going and narrating all these things to this person to cause corruption with that first one. Then going to another person over there, you know, such and such, I heard him saying this and I heard him saying that, and he was mentioning you, and going and spreading tales and corruption there to cause corruption between them. As Shaykh al-Uthaymeen, he mentioned, namima is to go and spread tales between people with the intent of causing corruption. You are going to cause corruption. What do you think you're going to do? When you go and narrate from, you know, I heard he was saying this and he was saying that and he mentioned you. What do you think you are going to do other than corruption? Do you think that brother is going to go and give you a hug and say, MashaAllah, and give you gifts and go give gifts to the other person? What do you think is going to happen other than corruption? And that's why Shaykh al-Fawzan mentioned that statement that a namam, the one who goes and carries tales between people, causes more corruption in an hour, in a small amount of time, than a magician does in a year. The namam, the one who carries tales between people, and he said this and he said that and he mentioned this and he mentioned that, and goes narrating this to here and there. Shaykh al-Fawzan mentioned that namam causes more corruption in an hour than a magician does in a year. That's why it's mentioned in another hadith that the namam will not smell the fragrance of paradise. A severe sin, the namimah, spreading tales between people, spreading stories between people. I heard this and I heard that, and yes, he was saying this and he was saying that. And then the shaitan whispers to the people to make it beautified to you, as though you're doing something good, as though you're being modest and humble and doing something good. As though you go to a person, brother, you know, I don't really want to mention this to you. I didn't really want to tell you, but you know, Ahmed was saying some really bad things about Uganda yesterday. Uganda? Where was it? Nigeria. He was saying some terrible things about Nigeria. I really didn't want to tell you this, you know, but you know, I had no choice. I had to just, you know, people, the shaitan makes it like that to you. So you think you're not doing anything wrong. You convince yourself that you're not doing anything wrong because of the way that you then present it. And, you know, I didn't really want to say this, but I got no choice. I have to let you know. And so you are now convinced by the shaitan you're not doing anything wrong. And the reality is all you're doing is corruption. All you're creating is corruption. Now what have I done? That would just be corruption. What is the purpose and the benefit of that? What is the purpose and the benefit of narrating from this to that? This is namima and corruption. And so the Messenger said that the second individual, he is being punished for namima, for spreading tales and stories between people. And that, as Shaykh al-Uthaymeen said, is a disease in society. It's a disease, as Shaykh al-Uthaymeen called it. He called it a disease in society. A disease that people are overcome with. That and the other disease, he said there are two diseases in society. Two illnesses that go around in society. One is namima, people spreading stories and carrying tales between people. Yeah, I heard this and I heard that and he was saying this and that. And the second disease, backbiting. That you backbite people and you speak evil of that person. Yeah, he's this and he's that. And again the shaitan beautifies it for you as though you are not doing anything wrong. Yeah, but you know, he always does X, Y, Z, and you know, him this and him that. And the way that you do it and the way you are thinking about how you're saying it, You convince yourself you're not actually backbiting, and you are backbiting. He this and he that, and they this and they that. And yeah, I advise, that's the classic. Yeah, I advised the brother. I advised him about this and that, and no, he didn't listen. He's doing this and he's doing that. So now you convince yourself you're not backbiting anymore. And the reality is you are still backbiting. It is backbiting. Speaking about your own brothers and talking about this one and talking about the mosque and the mosque this and the mosque that, or this brother this brother that, or worse than that, the scholars. All the Hizbiyun, how much they speak against Sheikh bin Baz and Sheikh Al-Albani and Sheikh Rabi', how much backbiting they do of our scholars, how much evil they say about our scholars. This is all corruption, disease in the society. And so the second person the messenger said was a Nammam. Kana yamshi bin namima. He used to go spreading tales between people. So he's in the punishment of the grave for that action. So then what happened? And this is important what happened next, because many people they fall into a mistake about this next part. Then when the messenger said these two are both being punished in the grave, one for the urine issue, one for the storytelling issue, ثم أخذ جريدة رطبة فشقها نصفين بنصفين ثم غرز في كل قبر واحدة. The messenger then got a leaf, a green leaf, a fresh green leaf of some tree or plant or shrub, and he split that leaf in half and put half of the leaf into one grave, planted it in one grave, and planted the other half in the other grave. Fresh green leaf, planted them in there with the soil. And then he said, then the companions, they said to the messenger, فَقَالُوا يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ لِمَا صَنَعْتَ هَذَا? O messenger of Allah, why did you do that? Why did you put these green leaves, plant them into the graves? Why? فقال, so the messenger said, لعله أن يخفف عنهما ما لم ييبسا. He said, perhaps, hopefully, the punishment of the grave will be reduced for them as long as these leaves stay green and fresh. Eventually they're going to die, but as long as they stay green and fresh and moist, then perhaps the punishment of the grave will be reduced for them. Ibn al-Qayyim said, فَجَعَلَ التَّخْفِيفِ مُقَيَّدًا بِمُدَّةِ رُطُوبَتِهَا فَقَطْ. How is that an evidence that the punishment of the grave is continuous? How? So the messenger put those green leaves, moist, wet, fresh green leaves into the graves, and said that hopefully as long as these leaves remain moist and fresh and green, then the punishment of the grave hopefully will be reduced from them. How is that an example that the punishment is continuous?
When the leaves die, the punishment is going to resume.
So the messenger said, as long as the leaves remain moist, meaning fresh and green, then hopefully the punishment will be reduced. Meaning once they are no longer fresh and green, they're going to die eventually. It's not plants, it's just a leaf. The leaf, you take it fresh and green and put it in, eventually it will die. So eventually it will die, and when it does die, then the punishment will go back to what it was. The messenger said, hopefully it will be reduced as long as the leaves are still moist. Once they are no longer moist and they've dried up and died, then the punishment goes back to what it was, indicating therefore that the default with the punishment is that it is continuous, and it was only going to be reduced during that time period that the leaves were in there. Now then, the people, they say that it is therefore sunnah to do what? Many people, they do it when they bury their dead, when they bury their relatives. What do? They plant plants onto the grave. Some of them I've seen, these huge green leaves. I don't even know if those plants are UK plants or where they get them from. Huge green leaves, literally about this size, how I'm showing you now. Maybe like 2 foot. Massive green leaves. And they have them there because big green leaves, then inshallah they will remain moist and green for longer than a tiny leaf that will die quickly. Big green leaves, they put them in, believing that the punishment of the grave will be reduced for their beloved ones. But that action of doing that, of putting the plants into the graves with the leaves, believing this will reduce the punishment of the grave, is not a sunnah to do. It is not correct and not permissible, not a sunnah for people to do that. But then how? If the messenger did it. Somebody now says to you, why? Here's the hadith, the messenger did it when he walked past those 2 graves and he put the leaves in there. Hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. How are you going to tell me I can't put the leaves in there to reduce the punishment for my beloved one? What are you going to say?
As the prophets knew the affair of the people in the grave. So
That's one answer. The messenger knew by revelation, by inspiration, that those 2 graves, specifically those 2 people, were definitely being punished. You, when you bury someone, how do you know whether they're being punished or whether they are in blessing of the grave? Why are you going to refute your own relative after you bury them? Have this bad thought of them that they're going to be in punishment. Let me put the leaves in. How do you know if they're in punishment in the first place? They could be in blessing in the grave. Punishments and blessings of the grave. They could be in blessings, in bliss. How do you know they're in punishment in the first place? You're going to put leaves there. The messenger did that because he knew by inspiration, revelation, that they were being punished. That is one point of evidence. Secondly, if that was an act of sunnah and it was a means of reducing the punishment of the grave from your beloved ones that you bury, then who would have done it? Every single companion would have done it when they buried the other companions. How beloved they were to one another. When they buried Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Umar and Ali, all of the companions, when they buried each other, would they not have done this then? That the Salaf, after the companions, the Tabi'een, the Atba Tabi'een, would they not have done this for their brothers, for their beloved ones, for their family members, for their wives, their children, etc.? Would they not have done this for each other? Would this not have been a practice of the Sahaba and the Salaf? Reduce the punishment of the grave. Who's going to miss out on that for their beloved ones? And yet the companions never ever did that. There is not a single narration of any companion ever burying one of their beloved ones from their own family or one of the other companions and then placing a leaf into the grave. Never. Because they knew that is not a sunnah. That was only done by the messenger as a specific action of the messenger. Because he knew that they were in punishment. And so this is not a sunnah for the people to do, for the people to put those leaves into the graves. And it's a mistake that many people, they do fall into, believing because of this hadith in Bukhari and Muslim and not understanding it, thinking that it's a sunnah to do that. Rather, what the sunnah is, that you make dua for your deceased ones. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive them. Ask Allah to have mercy upon them. Make dua for them. Give charity on their behalf. Do the goodness that you can do, but do not fall into bid'ah. Do not fall into the types of things people fall into at the graveyards. Beautified graveyards, thousands of pounds, building all these things around it and a huge tombstone and cemented over and beautiful and flowers, and some of them you see how they are made. They even have gutter systems in them for when it rains and the water can come out and all these things. All of that impermissible, haram. What is permissible Islamically is that you simply put at the head of the grave some small rock the size of your palm, just to identify that this plot here is a grave. Because if you put nothing down, then people will be walking around and you wouldn't even know where the plots are, where people are buried. So you can put down a small rock at the head of the burial to identify that this section here now is a plot, somebody is buried there. But outside of that, all of these tombstones and beloved father and this and that and Hajji such and such and beloved son and all these things, it is not permissible and it is not correct Islamically to do those things. And it's not just one of those things where a person can say, well, it's not haram, let me do it. It is haram. It is actually haram to do it, to put those tombstones on and all that kind of thing. So then, that was the issue of whether the punishment is continuous, and the conclusion is therefore that the evidences seem to indicate the punishment will be continuous and the blessing will be continuous, because you remember that narration about the souls being in the birds, flying in paradise, up until the hadith said, up until the soul is returned to the body when the resurrection occurs. That indicates they are in blessing all the way up until the resurrection too. So that is what the evidences indicate. The next topic. Why has it been decreed that we cannot experience the punishments of the grave going on? Why can we not hear the people being punished? Why can we not hear or see or be able to experience that occurring from those people in their graves? Why has that been kept hidden from us? There are several reasons. Shaykh al-Uthaymeen mentioned them. Shaykh al-Uthaymeen, he said, وَذَلِكَ لِحِكَمٍ عَظِيمَةٍ. There are many great wisdoms behind that as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concealed the punishment of the grave from us. Firstly, we already mentioned the hadith, لولا أن لا تدافنوا لدعوت الله أن يسمعكم من عذاب القبر, where the messenger said, was it not for the fact that you would not bury your dead, I would have made dua to Allah to allow you to hear it. One of the explanations of that hadith was that the punishment and the torment of the screams of the people in their graves is so severe, if you heard it, you would die yourself from the severity of what you hear. So that is perhaps one reason. Secondly, to maintain the honor and dignity of the person who has died. If you could go to graves and hear their screams and go to another grave and not hear anything, then you would know which ones are being punished and which ones are not. So the ones who are being punished, there is no honor or dignity left for them now. If all of the living people know, such and such is in the punishment of the grave, there would be no honor and dignity left for that person. So to maintain, to conceal and maintain the honor and dignity of that person, it is not known to us whether they are in punishment or blessing. Thirdly, to maintain the honor and dignity of who? The family. To maintain the honor and dignity of the family. If we could see or become aware of who was being punished in the graves, then that would be a disgrace to the family of that person. Look, your father, your son, your uncle, he's being punished and his screams are being heard. It would be a disgrace to the family. So Islam maintains the honor and dignity of that family, not to disgrace them as a consequence of the deceased. And also, third or fourth point, if we could hear the punishments of the grave going on, then there would be no test left for us. What is the test? To see whether we are going to have Imām that this happens or not. Because we cannot see it. We cannot hear it. So the test is there. Will you have Iman in that or not? If you can hear it, then there is no test. Everybody would believe it. The kuffar, they would accept that this happens in the grave because you can hear it and experience it. So the test is that you cannot hear it, you cannot experience it. So now that tests your iman. Do you believe and have certainty that the punishment of the grave certainly occurs? The next topic, what are the specific sins that we have been told lead to the punishment of the grave? Two of them we already mentioned now. The issue of urinating, not concealing yourself, not looking after yourself, and the issue of tail carrying and namima. Those two are mentioned as specific causes for the punishment of the grave. On top of that, from the specific causes of the punishment of the grave, in fact, there's a third one we mentioned already as well, which was the garments below the ankles. That one was mentioned as well as a specific cause for the punishment of the grave for the men who wear their garments below their ankles. Fourth, lying. Al-kadhib. Lying, the one who lies. Lying is a specific type of sin that is connected to the punishment of the grave. For the one who spreads lies. And it mentions in the hadith, a person spreads a lie and that lie spreads from the east to the west. Especially in these days now. You can spread a lie about somebody and before you know it, people in America have heard about it. People in Indonesia have heard about it. In Australia have heard about it. With the way it is now, the technology and the connectivity, a person spreads a lie and it can spread within seconds to the east and the west of the world. And so it is mentioned, a person who lies and that lie is spread to the east and the west, this individual is in line for the punishment of the grave. Also, fornication. Fornication is mentioned as a specific sin connected to the punishment of the grave. Also, interest. Taking interest with money, taking interest is a specific punishment or is a specific sin connected to the punishment of the grave. And again, that's something you have to be very careful of because the whole dunya, the world, the whole financial system, the whole economic system of the world is built upon interest. All these loans and banks and everything, mortgages and car loans and whatever it is all interest. Even when they talk about the rate of inflation, the ROI, the rate of inflation is considered as interest. That is also considered as interest. Like now, you know, the kuffar, they try to do this a lot. They say it's a 0% loan, but there's rate of inflation on it. Meaning that if you borrow from me £1,000 today, you borrow from me, or let's make an easier example to understand. Let's say you borrow from me £1 today. For £1 these days, what can you get from the shop? A can of Coke? Maybe £1 or something these days? An ice cream? £1? You can get those things for £1 these days. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, a can of Coke used to be like 20p, 30p. An ice cream used to be like 20p. The pasty at Greg's, the cheese and onion pasty, how much is it these days? £1.30. Oof. I remember a time we used to give them 50p and you used to get change. 30 years ago, it used to be 47p or something, 46p. So now what's happened? The price of things goes up over time. This is what the kuffar they say. They say, right now, if I lend you £1, that £1 is worth an ice cream, a can of Coke, a cheese pasty. But in 20 years from now in the future, how much will a can of Coke be? It won't be a pound, it's going to end up being £1.70, £1.90, £2 maybe. The ice cream from the ice cream man isn't going to be £1. In 20 years, 30 years, it's going to be maybe 180, 170. So they say to you, okay, there's no interest, but if you're going to pay me this £1 back in 20 years from now, you need to give me £1.80. And they say that's not interest, that's just the value of the pound. Right now, 20 years later, £1, I can't buy a Coke anymore. I can't buy an ice cream anymore. 20 years ago when I gave you that pound, when you borrowed it from me, I could. So now you should give me back the same value of the pound at least, so that I can still go and buy an ice cream now. I can buy a Coke now with that money that I gave you 20 years ago. So they call that the rate of inflation. And they say that's not interest. I'm not taking any extra money from you. I'm just taking the same value of the money that I gave you. Islamically, that is haram still. Islamically, that is interest. If I borrow a pound from you now, in 20 years from now, if you remember, and you ring me up and you come to my house and you say, you remember 20 years ago in Sheffield that day on a Sunday night, you took a pound off me. I want it back. In 20 years from now, I'm going to give you only £1. If you say, but I can't buy an ice cream with this pound anymore, I'll say, okay, well then go buy half an ice cream. £1 is what you're getting. That's what I borrowed off you 20 years ago. Islamically, a pound is a pound. Inflation and all these things are interest. So here the point is that any form of interest is impermissible. The rate of inflation, this particular issue, I remember in 2003, 20 years ago exactly. In 2003, I remember I went to Sheikh Rabia's house and I asked him about the rate of inflation. I asked him about this particular thing because in those days, back in 2002-03, I was at university here before I went to university in Medina. And so they used to have these student loans. Alhamdulillah, I never took anything, but I went to ask the Sheikh that year. And we asked him, Sheikh, this is what they say about the rate of inflation. That we'll give you this student loan and there's no interest, but later on when you pay it back, you have to give us the value of it back, which is going to be more because of inflation, etc. And we asked him all of this and he said, haram, interest. That is interest. If you borrow 10,000 now and they want 12,500 back in 10 years, that's interest, the 2,500. Doesn't matter what they call it, rate of inflation this, rate of inflation that. So this is one of the causes of interest or of a punishment of the grave, interest. A person taking interest is a means and a cause of the punishment of the grave. So that's a few of the specific sins that cause the punishment of the grave. Then the next topic, the opposite. What are the types of actions you can do specifically to save yourself from the punishment of the grave? To save yourself from the punishment of the grave. What is the first general obvious thing? Islam, so meaning what? Tawheed. So generally, all good actions and deeds. The more good actions and deeds you do, the more obedience to Allah you do, all of that goodness and actions and deeds and obedience, then that insha'Allah ta'ala is a means to you saving yourself from falling into the punishment of the grave. So generally, the more obedience and goodness you do, that's the answer to try and protect yourself from the punishment of the grave. But then there are specific things as well. That's general. But there are specific things. Some of these we mentioned earlier as well. Martyrdom. The one who dies as a martyr is protected from the punishment of the grave. And there is a narration from Al-Miqdam ibn Ma'di Karib. قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم للشهيد عند الله ست خصال. The martyr gets 6 things from Allah. The martyr, he gets 6 things, 6 characteristics, 6 traits, 6 affairs. What are they? يغفر له أو يغفر له في أول دفعة. That he is immediately forgiven. The martyr who sincerely dies in the path of Allah is immediately forgiven. وَيَرَى مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ. And he will see his place in paradise. وَيُجَارْ مِنْ عَذَابِ الْقَبْرِ. And this is the point. The third one is, he will be protected from the punishment of the grave. And 4, يَأْمَنْ مِنَ الْفَزَعِ الْأَكْبَرِ. That he will be saved from the great terror that will occur. وَيُوضَعُ عَلَى رَأْسِهِ تَاجُ الْوَقَارِ الْيَاقُوتَ مِنْهَا خَيْرٌ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا وَمَا فِيهَا. That a crown of jewels and pearls is placed upon his head, better than anything in the world. وَيُزَوَّجُ 72 زَوْجًا مِنَ الْحُورِ الْعِينِ. And that he is given from the 72 wives of the al-Hur al-Ain of paradise. وَيَشْفَعْ فِي 70 مِنْ أَقَارِبِهِ. And that he will also be able to do intercession for 70 people of his relatives. So the martyr is saved from the punishment of the grave. Another specific item is the person who dies because of a stomach disease. Somebody who dies due to a stomach disease is saved from the punishment of the grave. Man mata bida'i al-batn. There's a hadith from Abdullah ibn Yasar. قال كنت جالسا وسليمان بن صرت وخالد بن عرفطة فذكروا أن رجلا توفي. He said, I was sitting with some of these individuals. He mentioned Sulaiman ibn Sard and Khalid ibn Arfada. And he said that they mentioned, in this sitting they were having, they mentioned that so and so has died. They mentioned somebody in the community died. Mata bi batnihi. And they said that this individual in the community had died because of a stomach disease, some type of stomach problem. فَإِذَا هُمَا يَشْتَهِيَانِ أَنْ يَكُونَ شُهَدَاء جَنَازَتِهِ. And so both of them were eager to go to his janazah. They were both very eager, enthusiastic to go to his janazah. فَقَالَ أَحَدُهُمَا لِلْآخَرِ. One of them said to the other one, أَلَمْ يَقُلْ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم مَنْ يَقْتُلُهُ بَطْنُهُ فَلَنْ يُعَذَّبْ فِي قَبَرِهِ. One of them said to the other one, didn't the Messenger ﷺ say that whoever is killed because of his stomach, by his stomach, then he will not be punished in the grave? And the other one said, Bala, absolutely, absolutely yes. So this narration highlights that they knew that the one who dies because of some stomach problem, connected to that he is protected from the punishment of the grave. The scholars did differ over what is meant by a stomach problem. Some of them said it is some type of inflammation that occurs within the stomach, something of that nature that ends up leading to his death. Some of them said it is a disease linked to severe diarrhea, to such an extent that it causes all types of issues and he dies from that. But the reality is none of that is established in the Sunnah per se. What we know in the Sunnah generally is anybody who dies from any type of stomach disease, stomach illness, stomach related issue, then inshallah ta'ala they are from those who are protected from the punishment of the grave. Another specific method for protection from the punishment of the grave, this is mentioned by some of the scholars. It may be differed over by some of them, but they do say, some of them, to recite تبارك الذي بيده الملك, Surah Tabarak, to recite that every night. It is mentioned in the hadith of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. He said, من قرأ تبارك الذي بيده الملك كل ليلة منعه الله بها من عذاب القبر وكنا في عهد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم نسميها المانعة. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud in this narration, he says, whoever recites Tabarak al-Ladhi every night, then Allah will prevent the punishment of the grave from him. And he said, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the companion, radiyallahu anhu, he said, that during the time of the messenger, so he was obviously narrating this hadith after the messenger had died, but he said during the time of the messenger, when he was alive, we used to call this surah, Tabarakalladhi, we used to call it the mani'ah, the preventer. This surah was the preventer. It prevents the punishment of the grave occurring to you. So that is something some of the scholars they mention. Another specific point is regularly asking Allah for protection from the punishment of the grave. Al-isti'adha, which is something you do in every, as we said, every salah at the end. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhab al-qabr. That I seek refuge in the punishment of the grave, or I seek refuge with you from the punishment of the grave. So constantly making dua in your prayers, after the prayer, in other times, asking Allah to protect you from the punishment of the grave is one of the means of protection too. That brings us to the end of the section regarding the grave. There is just one small point to mention, that there are groups from the people of innovation, like the Khawarij and the Mu'tazila, some of the Mu'tazila, who reject that the punishment of the grave occurs. Khawarij and Mu'tazila, some of them, they reject that the punishment of the grave occurs. And there are some, like some of the Mu'tazila, who say that the punishment of the grave only occurs between the two blowings of the trumpet. On the Day of Judgment, the horn is going to be blown, and then the second time it is blown, and some scholars say even a third time. In between those blowings of the horn, some of the Mu'tazila say the punishment of the grave only occurs then. And even then it is upon all types of deviation, those who exited from Iman, etc., etc. Misguided opinions. So there are some misguided positions of the people of innovation as always, the Khawarij, the Mu'tazila, and other than them. But what is established and what is understood in the Sunnah, the methodology of Ahlul Sunnah, is that the punishment and the blessings of the grave, they occur and they continue up until the hour is established. That is the end of that particular chapter. And next time, insha'Allah ta'ala, we get to the chapter, all of this in rough chronological order. There is no exact chronological order, because we do not know on the Day of Judgment which order things are going to happen exactly. Some of the things are known. So this is a rough chronological order, rough, approximate. So now after a person has been in the barzakh, the next thing that's going to happen is the resurrection. So next thing that happens then, after the person dies, we did about death, we did about the fitnatul qabr, the trial of the grave, the questioning, we did the punishment and blessings of the grave. So that continues now up until now the next thing, which is the establishment of the hour. So that is going to be the next topic, regarding the establishment of the hour, regarding the day of resurrection. And that is where we will look at the signs of the Day of Judgment. We'll have a look at especially some of the major points like the Dajjal and all of the description of the Dajjal, what he looks like, and the famous hadith of Tamim ad-Dari, that the Dajjal is already alive now. And that Tamim ad-Dari, before he became Muslim, when they were lost at sea, they stumbled across an island, and in that island, in the cave, they came across and spoke to the Dajjal, mentioned in a hadith. And so we'll speak about that narration as well, and what he looked like, and about the creature that they came across on the island before they met the Dajjal. So we'll go through all of that. We'll go through all of those signs of the hour. That's going to be the next topic.